Hello everybody. Thanks very much for all of the questions. I got quite a lot, so I'm probably going to do this over more than one video. What I'm going to do is, because some people asked the same questions, rather than just repeat myself, I will put in the description box below the video your name and then a timestamp with where I've answered your questions. If I've forgotten anybody, by the way, I'm sorry about that, but you know, there were a lot of responses, so I may have missed somebody. Apologies if that's the case. Alright, so Alex A.E. asks, well, he asked some questions about continental philosophy, Marxism, Heidegger, Hegel, existentialism. I can't talk about those. I really, I just don't know anything about them, so certainly not enough to put anything out on YouTube about it, so I'm going to have to skip those. Sorry about that. Also asks, what are your philosophical concerns? I suppose my philosophical concerns will just be reflected in the videos I'm doing. I mean, generally speaking, philosophy of science, philosophy of biology. I've become quite recently quite interested in what I would call I guess the philosophy of extraterrestrial life, which is a really big and interesting question. Lots of interesting philosophical questions arise around extraterrestrial life, and it was something that people used to talk about a lot. When you look back at the during the sort of 17 and 1800s, loads and loads and loads of scholars were interested in this question of the existence of extraterrestrials. It seems to have sort of become, well, it's not so widely discussed anymore, and that's something I'd kind of like to try to revive. So watch out, because I'll be producing some videos on that at some point. Philosophy of science, philosophy of biology, that sort of, well, you can look at my videos and see what I'm interested in there. He also asks, who is your favourite philosopher and why? And this was asked by Owlus6, Chatnoir and Seamus Molloy also. So the answer I always give to this, I'm not sure I really have a favourite philosopher, but the answer I always give is Paul Feyerabend. Feyerabend was obviously, he was active within the philosophy of science, which is the field I'm most interested in. He took, I guess, more of a sort of historical approach. You know, it was sort of Feyerabend and Kuhn, I guess, are the two big figures. Feyerabend and Kuhn are the sort of two big figures who kind of advocated really focusing on the actual historical details of science, which I think is important if you're doing philosophy of science. Feyerabend was just a really fun writer. You know, you can just pick up any of his books and read them, and they're enjoyable to read. And philosophy isn't always like that. It can be quite dry and boring, but Feyerabend never was. He's really entertaining as a writer, and he had some genuinely really radical arguments. I mean, it's like you read Feyerabend and you just get mad reading him, okay? Because his arguments are, you know, they're really challenging ideas. I mean, and I think that there is a sort of kind of meta-philosophy that Feyerabend adopted. I mean, one of the criticisms that Feyerabend sometimes gets is that he wasn't always being entirely serious about what he was saying. You know, you can never know when Feyerabend is expressing his honest views. But part of the reason, I think, why he sometimes positioned himself as being more radical than he actually was, I mean, if he did that, part of the reason for that is he was a real follower of John Stuart Mill. And one of the things that Mill, I think one of Mill's greatest arguments on liberty is for the importance of freedom of expression, and not just freedom of expression, but the sort of expression and tolerance of a wide diversity of views. So, I mean, Mill makes a lot of points here. I think one of the most important points he makes is that, you know, you need to encounter radically different views. You need to deal with radically different views and think about them seriously, and you need to have people defending them, because even if your view is correct, even if you have got to the truth, you can't properly understand it if you haven't received genuine criticism. I mean, genuine, like, hard, difficult criticism. And so I think that what Firebend was doing was really acting in that Millian tradition. It's this idea that we achieve truth and understanding through the collision with error, I think is the phrase that Mill used. And that's, I think, a really important message, especially today when we look at universities and academia. There are certainly many respects in which it is becoming, I think, quite ideologically homogenous. I mean, you know, it's the sort of left-wing political correctness, I guess on the term you might use is social justice warrior. That kind of ideology is quite prevalent at universities now, and you know, I think it's a worry. And the general message that Firebend had of the importance of proliferating different views is a really important one, I think. Okay, so Paul Firebend, let's say Firebend. Okay, Archie Fisher asks, Trump or Hillary? So thanks for that question, Archie Fisher. What that means is that whatever I say, I'm going to annoy a whole bunch of people and probably lose a load of subscribers. So yeah, thanks for that. Actually, I live in the UK, so I didn't have to vote for either of them. But if I did have to vote for either of them, I would have voted for Hillary. Trump seems to me to have just no positive qualities whatsoever, and the worst thing about him, the thing that really bothers me about Trump, is he's just a complete moron. I mean, he's a complete idiot, like astonishingly so. I mean, he's not just an idiot; he's an idiot who sort of makes no attempt whatsoever at sort of improving his intellectual capabilities. He makes no attempt whatsoever at really engaging with evidence. I mean, he's just astonishingly stupid. Now, what people often say, you know, because I've said this a few times, like online and stuff, and the response I always get to this is, well, you know, Trump was a really great businessman, right? He very successful, very rich. You wouldn't get that far if you were really dumb. But I just want to, so just to clarify, I don't know whether or not Trump was smart in the past. Maybe he was. Maybe he was like really intelligent in the past, but he isn't anymore. I mean, I don't know why. Maybe he's got, maybe it's dementia, or maybe it's just, you know, when you get successful, maybe you get lazy. I guess if I had like £1 billion, I might just get lazy. I might just lie on a bed of money and, you know, forget about working hard at things like philosophy. Who knows? But the point is that he just seems like a total moron to me, and so I wouldn't be able to vote for that. Okay, Owless6 wants me to comment on David Chalmers's Philpapers Survey, and this is quite useful because this kind of covers a lot of stuff actually, so that's a good question. So if you don't know, the Philpapers Survey was a survey that was given to professional philosophers, basically just asked them their views on a whole bunch of important topics within philosophy. And it's quite interesting, so you know, you should look it up, type in Philpapers Survey on Google. What I'm going to do is just go through the list and I'll comment on the topics that I have clear views on. I'll just skip the rest. Okay, so a priori knowledge, yes or no? No. Abstract objects, Platonism or nominalism? Nominalism. Aesthetic value, objective or subjective? And a Fast and Bulbous also asked this question. Well, it's obviously subjective, isn't it? I mean, obviously, right? I've met a lot of people who claim to be objectivists, but I always wonder, like, do you really believe that? I mean, come on. Okay, analytic synthetic distinction, yes or no? It's a useful abstraction. External world, idealism, skepticism, or non-skeptical realism. And Jonathan Perez also asks about my view on this. So I'm basically a realist, but what I usually say is I think I'm kind of a realist of a Humean variety. I think that the skeptic basically wins the argument. I mean, I don't know how to refute the skeptic. I don't know how to respond to the skeptic. And it's obviously something I've thought about a lot. I mean, it's one of the biggest questions in philosophy, right? And I have no idea. And the fact that this is still a problem after, you know, 2,000 years kind of looks like we're maybe never going to solve it, you know? So the skeptical challenge, I think, is a really serious one. So why am I a realist? Well, I guess there are two reasons, right? One is that I just find it psychologically impossible to be a skeptic. I mean, I can kind of recognise when I'm in the philosophy classroom, I can sort of see the force of the skeptical argument, but I can't accept it. I just don't believe it. Well, believe skeptic isn't going to believe, but I just don't accept it. I just do believe that I'm currently looking at a camera and that I have hands. I just do believe that, and I can't get rid of that belief. So it's sort of in some ways kind of irrelevant how clever the skeptic's argument is. And the other problem with skepticism, of course, is that if you are a skeptic, well, it's like that's it. It's over. The whole of inquiry is just over at that point. And not just inquiry, not just intellectual inquiry, but like everything. I mean, if you're a genuine skeptic, if you accept radical skepticism, there's nothing you can do. It's like it's just finished, man. So yeah, I don't think that it's a position that I can't accept, and I think even if I could accept it, I just wouldn't, because I'd get bored. And so just as another point here, the way this question is phrased, it says idealism, skepticism, or non-skeptical realism. Well, I'm not an idealist, but I don't view realism and idealism as competing. If you're an idealist, I think that's still a kind of realism, and at least in the traditional forms of idealism, the kind of idealism that Berkeley had, I would consider that a kind of realism, because Berkeley still believed that there were tables and chairs and trees and so on. He just had a very different account of the kind of fundamental metaphysical nature of these things. I mean, my objection to idealism, well, I guess there are a few objections to idealism, but in general, I'm not really keen on metaphysics, and I guess we'll actually get to that in some of the later questions. And I also just don't really understand idealism. I mean, I've never been able to, it's never kind of been explained in a way that sort of makes it coherent to me. I literally don't know what it means, to say that the whole of reality consists of thought. Just thought or mind, it just seems like complete nonsense. It's like saying, colourless green ideas sleep furiously. And obviously if I don't understand a position, then I can't accept it, I can't believe it. Okay, free will. Compatibilism, libertarianism, or no free will. And Philip Yang and Vegan Volks also asked about my views on free will. I guess I'm a compatibilist. I don't know. I mean, free will isn't a question that has always struck me as all that interesting, to be honest. It's just not something that I'm all that concerned about. I mean, I think that we have this kind of folk concept of free will, and I suppose in some ways that folk concept is connected to ideas about moral responsibility and so on. And then as philosophers, we can just make that precise in whatever way is useful. One thing I would say is I've never quite understood the motivation for adding indeterminacy, for sort of thinking that determinism and indeterminacy are particularly important. I can't really see how being in a metaphysically indeterminate world is really supposed to help you. I mean, it's sort of like, you're either your actions are completely predetermined, or ultimately your actions are like the result of a coin flip, right? Well, I mean, either way, where's the agency in that? And I am aware that there are views of free will, there are libertarian views of free will that sort of try to use indeterminacy, they try to build indeterminacy into the system in such a way that it does create more agency, but I'm not really sure that's ever made a lot of sense to me. I mean, I guess I'm inclined to say that if there's anything significant in our talk about free will, the important stuff must be about capacities that we have that are just independent of any considerations about determinism and indeterminism. So an important capacity might be the capacity to reflect on one's actions, for instance, and that's obviously compatible with determinism. But yeah, I mean, I'm a compatibilist who doesn't really care much about the free will question, I suppose. All right, God, theism or atheism? Calvin Smith asks this. Atheism, knowledge claims, contextualism, relativism, or invariantism. I would say invariantism. I don't think I have quite a bit to say about contextualism, but I don't think I can really go into that here because I can't remember off the top of my head what it is. Maybe I could upload. I did an essay on this quite recently. Maybe I could upload that. I don't know. All right. Knowledge, empiricism, or rationalism. Empiricism. I mean, I suppose I should sort of clarify the traditional way that debate has been framed has often been in terms of a kind of psychological claim, where the empiricists claim that we have innate ideas or innate concepts, and rationalism. Sorry, I just got that the wrong way around, didn't I? The rationalists claim that we have innate ideas or innate concepts, and the empiricists deny it. I wouldn't sort of go in for that traditional form of empiricism, for one thing because I think that there are pretty serious problems with the very concept of innateness, and actually I'm doing a video series on that right now, my series on nature versus nurture. So I would sort of treat empiricism as a kind of more of an epistemological stance, right? You know, it's that the justification is based on sense experience. The justification of claims is based on sense experience, but where our ideas or concepts come from, I'm not too concerned about. I'm quite happy to just let psychologists answer that question. Okay, laws of nature, Humean or non-Humean? Well, I suppose I mean, I guess my kind of inclination is more to, I don't know, I mean, yeah, more towards Humeanism, but I mean, I take more of a kind of anti-realist stance on laws of nature, and I don't think I wouldn't say I'm a Humean, but I'm not at all a traditional non-Humean either, so I think I'm just going to skip that question, actually. Okay, meta-ethics, moral realism or anti-realism? Well, anti-realism, obviously. Obviously. It's like that aesthetic value question, you know? I've certainly met people who say that they're moral realists, but really? Okay, I'm kidding, you know. I know it's a serious debate and everything, but yeah, I'm very firmly on the anti-realist side when it comes to value claims, value judgments. Meta-philosophy, naturalism or non-naturalism? Well, I suppose the first question there is, what exactly do you mean by naturalism? I mean, certainly I think my approach to philosophy could be characterised as naturalist in many ways. I mean, I engage very closely, I think, with the empirical sciences. I don't really have much time for things that would traditionally be considered supernatural or paranormal, you know, gods and spirits and all of that stuff. So yeah, I mean, I suppose it's that would be a very weak kind of naturalism, right? I mean, there's nothing supernatural, and science is really great. That's a very weak kind of naturalism. Now, but I think there are other forms of naturalism that make more substantial claims that I have some pretty serious problems with. So if we think about a kind of ontological naturalism, I guess this would essentially be a sort of materialism or physicalism maybe, and I wouldn't say that I'm part of that tradition at all. So my main worry about physicalism is, I mean, I guess this is a question of, well, what exactly is it that's supposed to actually count as physical? And maybe a better way to put the question is, what is it that we could discover, right, that would actually refute physicalism? The problem is that when we look at the history of science, it seems like the standards for what counts as being a material or physical thing have changed over time. So if you go back to Newton's time, well, when Newton proposed his theory of gravity, it was one of the main objections to it was that he failed to provide a mechanistic explanation of gravity. He just treated gravity as this kind of force, which was seen as being really kind of occult and spooky. Yeah, but of course Newton's theory triumphed, and what happened was it wasn't that sort of the materialist tradition was considered to be refuted. Instead, we just accepted that, yeah, forces and fields are a perfectly acceptable part of the material world. And I guess a similar kind of thing happened with the quantum revolution. I mean, all of this really bizarre things going on the quantum level, or so we're told. And what happened with that is that physicalism sort of absorbed it. Yeah, it just changed with it. I think that what is really going on when people say that they are physicalists or materialists is it's kind of a sort of an expression of a deference to the content of science. I mean, the idea, I guess, is that the ideal science, there is nothing more to the world than what is described, than what will be described in the ideal science. And then the thought is that our current science is at least approximately close to the ideal science. That seems to me to be the sort of real content of physicalism, and that isn't something that I accept. I don't really accept the very idea of an ideal science. I don't think there's any reason to believe, even if there is an ideal science, that our science is anywhere close to it. So I wouldn't accept any kind of ontological naturalist claim in that sense. Another kind of naturalism would be a sort of methodological naturalism. The idea that philosophy is continuous with science, that philosophy and science use the same methods, and I don't know, I guess, yeah, I mean, that's probably fair enough. I pretty much accept that kind of thing, I suppose. I don't think there's like a strict distinction between them. So, where are we now? Moral judgment, cognitivism or non-cognitivism. And the user hahaha lol010101 has also asked about this. So my view is that the cognitivism, non-cognitivism question is just a bad question, which has produced lots of bad work. So, for those of you who aren't aware, it's a question about the meaning of moral statements. And what the cognitivist says is that moral statements simply express propositions that can be true or false, whereas the non-cognitivist says that moral statements do not express propositions. Maybe they express emotional attitudes or something. So think of it, if I say, for instance, Mount Everest is the tallest mountain on the earth, that expresses a proposition. I'm attributing a property to a particular object. I'm saying that I'm attributing the property of being the tallest mountain on earth to Mount Everest, and that's true or false. On the other hand, if I hit my thumb with a hammer and just go ouch, it's just an expression, right? There's no proposition there. There's nothing that can be evaluated as being true or false. And so the cognitivist says that when we make moral claims, that's like the claim about Mount Everest, whereas the non-cognitivist will say that it's more like the ouch. So that when somebody says, say, abortion is wrong, what they really mean is like abortion, boo. So I just think that there's certainly no need for there to be any kind of general answer to this question, and I think in many cases there's perhaps just no fact of the matter whether a statement expresses a proposition or not. It's like that's a kind of further abstraction. I mean, it's what does abortion is wrong mean? Well, you all know what it means. It means abortion is wrong, right? I'm sceptical that there's really any answer here. I think it's perhaps just indeterminate, and I don't think it's an important question. I don't think it matters. I mean, there are some cases, I guess, where I would say moral statements just are propositional, and that's if you imagine a professional philosopher, professional moral philosopher who's an objectivist about morality making moral statements, I think it's quite clear that they are expressing propositions, right? I mean, that's what they are doing. Just ask them, right? On the other hand, if you think about people on a protest or something like that, shouting that abortion is wrong, then maybe that is just an expression of emotional attitudes. And then there are going to be, I guess, some cases that are just sort of in between. So if you think about, maybe this example is going to be a little bit controversial, but I've often had disagreements online with feminists who are constantly whinging whenever anybody expresses themselves sexually. You know, if you ever have, let's say, a newspaper with some naked women in it or something, you can be sure that feminists will start moaning about that. And they'll start talking about objectification. And it seems to me that in the vast majority of cases, that's just meaningless. I mean, it means nothing. I'm aware that there are professional philosophers who've defined it more carefully, and they've really thought about it. But in a lot of cases, you know, when you ask people, well, what exactly do you mean by objectification? What is supposed to be so bad about it? All you have to do is, you know, put in the tiniest amount of critical thinking, as it were. Just push them just a little bit, and you can see that it's just a word. It's just a noise that they're parroting. You know, just doesn't mean anything, right? And so I would say that when we look at what's going on with morality in general, asking about the meaning of moral statements is probably the wrong question. And so yeah, I guess maybe I should say a bit more about that in another video. Maybe I think that would probably need a video to address properly. But that's where I am at the moment. Okay, moral motivation, internalism or externalism. Internalism. Newcombs Problem. 1 box or 2 boxes. So if you don't know about this, go and look it up, because Newcombs Problem is a really cool little problem. If you haven't heard about it, pause the video now, go and look up Newcombs Problem. It's a lot of fun. So for me, Newcombs Problem isn't a problem. The answer is plainly obvious. Obviously, you go for 1 box, right? You choose 1 box. And here's how I think about it. Divide the population into 2 groups, and you've got 1 group are the people who choose 1 box, 1 group are the people who choose 2 boxes. Almost every single person who chooses 1 box walks away with £1 million. Almost every single person who chooses 2 boxes walks away with only £1,000, right? So I guess if you're a 2 boxer, the question is, what on earth makes you think that you're so special that you can beat those odds? I mean, it's to me it's bizarre that anybody would choose 2 boxes. It's a ridiculous thing to do, unless you just want less money. I mean, of course, I get the intuition, right? The intuition is, well, look, whatever's happened in the past has happened. Nothing you do now can change what is in the box, right? But the point is that you have this oracle that is a near perfect predictor. It's like you've got to think of 2 boxing as a kind of temptation, yeah? And whatever kind of reasoning you go through that leads you to fall into temptation, the oracle is going to be able to predict with near perfect accuracy whether you will engage in that reasoning, right? Whether you will fall into temptation. So you want to make sure that you don't fall into temptation, which means you take 1 box. And I just know, you know, that some smart ass will come along with a clever argument in the comments about how you should actually choose 2 boxes. But at the end of the day, I'm going to get £1 million and you're only going to get 1,000. And that's the case just by stipulation. Just, you know, that's almost certainly going to be the outcome just based on how the problem is defined. So why on earth would you take 2 boxes, man? Take 1 box. Okay. Perceptual experience. I'm basically just a direct realist on perceptual experience. Politics. Calvin Smith also asked about my politics. I'm sort of libertarian-ish, I guess. Not really an extreme libertarian, not one of the kind of US-style libertarians that wants to completely, you know, dismantle the health service and privatise the roads and everything. But I would say I lean libertarian. Okay, science, scientific realism or scientific anti-realism. Jonathan Perez also asked my view here. If you've seen my scientific realism video, I do say in that video that in the introductory video, that I'm a realist, and I've pretty much changed my mind about that now. I would say that I'm quite firmly on the anti-realist side. I mean, man, there's a lot to say about this, because it's a problem that I think has been the thing that I've been most interested in for the last couple of years, so it's hard to narrow it down. I mean, I guess the simple answer is that any kind of scientific realism, it seems to me, is going to rest on an inference from success to truth. Because, you know, if you say that you believe some aspect of our scientific theories, let's say you believe that there are electrons, well, you know, why do you believe that there are electrons? Why don't you believe that there are the, you know, Homeric gods, or the phlogiston, or caloric, or any other, you know, entity that's been proposed? And surely the answer has to, in one way or another, be because of the success, right? The success of our theories, or maybe our practices, or whatever, in terms of with respect to electrons. And so there's an inference involved from success to truth, and I've come to be very, very sceptical of that inference from success to truth. Okay, the trolley problem, switch or don't switch. Well, at least on the standard trolley problem I'd switch. Zombies, conceivable but not metaphysically possible, or metaphysically possible. I suppose they're conceivable, but I don't think it has any metaphysical consequences. Okay, I think, what was that? Yeah, Owlus6 also asked for my favourite philosophical books, and so did Yank the Roots. I would say Feyerabend's Against Method. I've already talked about Feyerabend. Language, Truth and Logic by A.J. Ayer. It's a beautiful book, that. Really short, simple, decisive manifesto for logical positivism. It's a lot of fun to read, that one, and quite short, but very, yeah, it's just a great book that. Third one, I would maybe say The Structure of Evolutionary Theory by Stephen Jay Gould. That might not be a philosophy book, though. There's a lot of philosophy in it, and there's a lot of really interesting history of biology and philosophy of biology. It's a fascinating book, that. So those are my three. Owlus6 also asked for my favourite film. Christopher L. and Fast and Bulbous also ask about my favourite films. I don't really have a favourite film. I suppose my usual answer when people ask is 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is just an amazing film. In general, I'm into action and comedies. I mean, I love a lot of movies. I don't have time to watch a lot of movies, but I do enjoy a lot of movies. Most of the movies I see, I enjoy. I'd say my favourite actors are Arnold Schwarzenegger and Nicolas Cage. So you know, those are some of the things I'm into there. Okay, B. Ali asks, what do you think about the theory of evolution, particularly common ancestry? Do you consider it a fact insofar as one can assert it to be? So as I mentioned, I'm a scientific anti-realist. I would say, I guess, very broadly speaking, I think the function of science is the prediction and control of observable phenomena. So I would not, I don't believe claims about, you know, the deep past, you know, spiders and humans, say, have a common ancestor. That's not something I would believe. But, I mean, I always want to be a little bit careful when it comes to evolution because of creationism. I don't think that my position is... I'm not at all in support of creationism. And in fact, I would say that from my point of view, I think that in some ways I'm even more against creationism than other than the standard biologists, because from my point of view, creationists make two mistakes, right? First of all, they accept a theory which is just obviously empirically inadequate, and then they're realists about it. So, I mean, especially if you're like a young Earth creationist, if you think that the world was made 6,000 years ago, well, you know, you accept a bad theory and you're a realist about it. So I disagree with you on both counts there. Yeah, so I don't think that evolution is a fact, but well, I think evolution is. I don't think that the contemporary theory of evolution is a fact, but that's for reasons having to do with my general philosophy of science, not because I'm at all inclined towards a creationist position. Right, Breeze Tahir asks, could you suggest books, websites, or YouTube channels to help me as a beginner in philosophy? Also, I'm going to study molecular biology and genetics, so any advice about those topics would be great. It's kind of hard to give a recommendation because it really depends on what sort of area of philosophy you're interested in. Since you mentioned the biology thing, well, the books that I've used are mainly Brian Garvey's Introduction to Philosophy of Biology. That's a really nice book, I think. Kim Sterolny and Paul Griffiths have a good one, but that was released in the 90s, I think. It might be a little bit dated, but I mean they go over the main debates very well. Alexander Rosenberg and Daniel McShay's book on the philosophy of biology. Also, I mean, if you're interested in the philosophy of biology, I'd recommend reading up on the history of the subject. I think that that's really important to know how biology developed. Ernst Mayr's book, The Growth of Biological Thought, is a classic in the field and pretty comprehensive. I mean, it's, again, a little bit dated now. That was released in the 80s, so you know, it doesn't really cover the contemporary developments, but that's, I think, a really good one for the earlier history. As I say, it's hard, though, to give advice about this since I'm not sure what it is you're actually looking for. So maybe if you want to, leave another comment or just send me a message or something with something a bit more specific, I could help. Calvin Smith asks, are you going to make a video on ethical naturalism in your meta-ethics playlist? Maybe one day, but I'm kind of bad at finishing things like this, so who knows whether that will happen. He also asks, what inspired you to start your YouTube channel? Matthew McVeagh asked about this as well. Well, actually, my YouTube channel, as far as I recall, it began, I think, with a John Searle quote. So I think it was John Searle who said that something along the lines of that if you want to understand something yourself, teach it to another person, right? You don't really understand something yourself until you know how to teach it to somebody who doesn't yet understand it, basically. And that really kind of resonated with me, and so I thought, well, I'm gonna try to start teaching this stuff. So in some ways it kind of began selfishly, because it was just about making sure that I understood it. I feel that as it's gone on, though, I think it's become something a lot more than that. I really believe in promoting philosophy to the wider public. I really believe in getting it out there. Academia can become very insular, and philosophy can be very abstract, sort of disconnected with the rest of the world in a way, and it's something that I think people aren't really exposed to the details of what's going on in philosophy departments, and part of the point of this channel really is to try to get it out there, to try to make it a bit more accessible to the public for anybody who's interested. Who knows whether I'm really going to be particularly successful at promoting it to the wider public, but I think that that's probably my goal. What is your background/education? This was also asked by Chatnoir, Chloe Sutton, Jeff Nippard, and the Polymath. So I'm a postgraduate student at the University of Exeter, and I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Exeter, and that's just philosophy. So my degree and my current work is just philosophy, just straight philosophy. So that's pretty much the answer to that. What are your views on the new atheist movement? I don't know if I really have many strong views about that. I don't think that the arguments that Dawkins, for example, gives, from what I've read, are particularly good ones. You know, I mean, I think if you want to go for philosophy of religion, then I would say that some good atheists are Michael Martin, Graham Oppy. That would be, but then that can be very technical. And I think Dawkins was probably just it was intended for just a lay audience, right? So I guess it's maybe a bit unfair to evaluate him in the way that you would evaluate professional philosophy of religion. So, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't really read a lot of the New Atheists. I guess the main thing that bothers me about the New Atheists and that whole crowd is I suppose you could say the scientism, by which I mean the illegitimate application of you know, sort of trying to think of science as applying more broadly or more generally than it appropriately does, or thinking that science kind of answers more questions than it actually does. Treating science as though it's the only legitimate subject, right? And I mean, so Sam Harris has quite scientific views on ethics, for instance, which I don't find particularly plausible. Lawrence Krauss and other physicists like that have occasionally made quite disparaging comments about philosophy, which have struck me as being basically just kind of ignorant of the subject. So Lawrence Krauss and I think it was Neil deGrasse Tyson are a couple of prominent physicists, and I guess they would be New Atheists, right? I'm not really sure who counts as a New Atheist actually, but I guess they would be New Atheists who sort of have openly said that philosophy is basically a waste of time. And yeah, I mean, their views seem to be just ignorant of the subject as far as I can tell. So I don't like that. But, you know, I mean, I'm an atheist, right? I mean, so I'm all in favour of trying to persuade people to give up religion. It's obvious rubbish. So on that point, I'm with them. Casually Curious says, "What's the process like for preparing? What's the process like preparing for video? Do you dive straight into the primary sources or use Introduction to X and that sort of text? How do you go about learning the material sufficiently to feel prepared to present it?" I don't know. It depends on the video really. Sometimes I've had like a formal training in it. So with the nature versus nurture video, I mean that one I've been doing a course recently on philosophy of biology that has covered innateness, and so I've had some formal training on that, and so that's kind of given me a place to start. But yeah, I mean, I will usually read, say, introductory books. Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is always basically the best place to start, and then I will read a bunch of articles that have been published on the subject, and just present what strike me as being the most interesting arguments there. Okay, Chatnoir asks, "Do you think that academic philosophy has an impact on society outside the universities?" Well, I suppose the answer to that is surely yes. I mean, it must do in some ways. There are some quite obvious examples. Things like bioethics, say, have some influence on standards of medical practice. I mean, I suppose that philosophers could be doing more, and as I mentioned, that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this channel. I suppose one point I would make is that I mean, it depends on what you mean by sort of impact on society outside the universities. Obviously, philosophy can't boast the kind of, and it never will be able to boast the kind of technological and engineering achievements that are associated with science, say. And I think I would want to resist any presupposition that a subject has to have that kind of practical utility